Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Algonquin territory. I'm going to get right into it and start off with a quote which you see on the screen. The Royal Commission of 1893, which proposed the establishment of Algonquin Park, recommended the name Algonquin to honor the Algonquin people as originally proposed by the Commission Chairman Alexander Kirkwood. That's a quote from a 1977 publication by the Friends of Algonquin Park. So this quote tells us how the park got its name and who it is named after. I think the name is very appropriate, but history will tell us that that is the only thing that anyone wanted the Algonquin people to have to do with the park. Who were these Algonquin people? Ask most people, and you'll find out that they know very little. I hope you leave here today with a greater knowledge of the Algonquins and another part of the history of Algonquin Park, a less well-known history. I know you have heard of the phrase, the Algonquin experience. It is somewhat of a trademark phrase that is used to denote a person's personal experience of Algonquin Park, of their exhilarating and memorable wilderness experience that gives Algonquin Park a special place in their heart. I am here to tell you what Algonquin Park has meant to the Algonquins and what it means to me as an Algonquin person. So again, who are these Algonquins and where did they come from? In July of 1795, the Algonquins replied to a query of an Indian Department representative. You have asked us to prove how these lands belong to us. The best proof that we can give is that the Creator created us on these lands. First European presence in the valley, the Ottawa Valley, occurred in 1613 when Samuel de Champlain met several canoes of Canaan Shipperini Algonquins in the lower Ottawa River. Some of these Algonquins acted as his guides and took him up and over to Muskrat Lake near present-day Cobden, Ontario. There you meet the Algonquin chief Nabotchis and his Algonquin band. He was then guided to the location of the Kitchissipperini Algonquins, led by the renowned Algonquin chief Tessawat at present-day Morrison's Island, just next door to Pembroke, which is less than 30 miles from Algonquin Park. While Champlain may have been the first European to come to Algonquin territory, many others soon followed, and many of them recorded their first encounters with Algonquin people. Others, such as the Jesuit missionaries, Gabriel Theodot Sagard, and the English fur trader Alexander Henry. In 1761, Alexander Henry stated that the Algonquins considered a trespass on their territory as sufficient to warrant the death of the invader. So, there is a significant amount of evidence that the Algonquins were here at the time of first contact and were spread throughout the valley. Historians Gordon Day and Bruce Strigger in the Handbook of North American Indians in 1978 mapped out the approximate location of historic Algonquin bands and their names. So in the shaded areas, we see the Ottawa River and some of the tributaries, the outline of the park, and the approximate location of some historic bands from some of the research that they've done from Champlain's journals and the missionaries. So you see the kind of watershed base, the bands, and the whole territory. In the following section, I will demonstrate that the Algonquins continued to occupy the territory, including the area now known as Algonquin Park. This section will clearly show the impact that logging and increasing non-Algonquin settlement had on the Algonquins and the environment. The following, taken from an Algonquin petition of March 1840, provides a clear indication of the effects of clear-cut forestry operations about 50 years prior to the establishment of the park. The Algonquin state, quote, "From time immemorial, our chief and only dependence from livelihood sprang from the chase, from the hunt which we procured abundances. Now our hunting grounds are entirely ruined. Our beaver and other furs have been destroyed by the constant fires and by the lumbermen in our majestic forests. Our deer have disappeared. Our timber, to the amount of hundreds of thousands of pounds annually, is taken from those very hunting grounds which were to be reserved for us, but from which we are sorry to say we derive not the least benefit. We are starving, our wives and our children are naked." The Algonquins are petitioning concerning their unsurrendered territory, the watersheds of the Mattawa, Ottawa, and the Ottawa rivers, including over 90% of the park, which is in Algonquin territory. This next quote from an 1847 petition is fairly typical of the many petitions and the documentation of the time. The Algonquin state, quote, that about 50 years ago, there was not a single white man's establishment above the Long Sault, which is near Hawkesbury. In those days, we were very happy, rich, and independent. We lived well. Our hunting grounds were rich in valuable furs, and our magnificent forests were well stocked with deer and game of every species. Now our children are reduced to begging, caused by the innumerable squatters and lumberers who destroy our magnificent forests and appropriate to themselves our fine timber. They maliciously set fire to our woods, by which means they have destroyed our beaver and peltries and driven away our deer. So for thousands of years, the Algonquins and their ancestors lived in the Kitchissippi, which is now the Ottawa Valley, as part of the environment, as part of the ecosystem. When Europeans arrived, they found a land of majestic old-growth forest, teeming with fish and wildlife of every description. Algonquins lived here for centuries in that environment. I present the following passages here primarily to provide you with evidence that the Algonquins acted sustainably and with conservation always in mind. Indian Department correspondence of 1827 gives some insight into the Algonquins' organized and sustainable use of their hunting grounds. The Algonquin, quote, the Algonquin on their hunting grounds, which lands they say they look upon as their property, have been in possession of them for a time out of mind. They say they have been nursing the lands by refraining from hunting on certain parts of them for a year or two, so that the beavers and other wild animals may multiply. Again, about 40 years later, the Algonquin chiefs state that in 1862, the Indian whose hunting ground is secured to him according to ancient usages amongst his people, I like this part, under the regulation of his chief, pays every attention to the increase, particularly the muskrat and the beaver, whilst the white trappers invariably exterminate them. So we hear from the Algonquins as first-hand witnesses of dramatic change and impacts upon themselves and the environment. The area of Algonquin Park was not exempt from the first wave of clear cutting. The type of forest we now see in Algonquin Park is nothing like it was back then. In a short period, a large and complete ecosystem that existed from time immemorial, and which included the Algonquins, was completely disrupted and forever altered. In the following, I will demonstrate to you that the Algonquins lived and occupied the area now known as Algonquin Park before it became Algonquin Park. In 1829, the surveyor Alexander Sheriff explored the country lying between the mouth of the Rideau River and Lake Huron. He commented on the extent of Algonquin hunting territory, as well as his encounter with an Algonquin. Quote, the lands of the Algonquin Indians do not extend quite to the height of land, at least on the Neswabic, now Petawawa River. At Cedar Lake, I remained nearly 3 days, awaiting the arrival of the son of the Algonquin chief named Constant Penancy, who had established his winter quarters there. Sheriff goes on to write about the Amab du Fond River, which is, as he states, named after the Indian who hunts upon it. The Amab du Fond River feeds and drains North T Lake, Manitou Lake, Kayashkokri Lake, and Lauder Lake, all which are within the northwest boundary of Algonquin Park. The Dufonds resided on Manitou Lake from the 1880s until 1916 in Algonquin Park. Here's another quote from a July 21st, 1863 petition. And it reads, the humble petition of the undersigned Indians hunting on the headwaters of the Madawaska and other rivers of central Canada show that the hunting grounds of your petitioners in the country watered by the Madawaska and adjoining streams, your petitioners humbly pray that your excellency will be pleased to make an order in council granting them 4,000 acres of land in the township of Lawrence for the purposes of a reserve. So 30 years before the park, we have the Algonquins asking for a reserve in the township at the headwaters of the Madawaska. That township is now within Algonquin Park. So eventually the park is established, but as we will see, there is no land for the Algonquins. Up until the early 1890s, they continued to press for an Indian reserve. There's a lot more correspondence on them doing so, even after the park was established. A final reply in 1894 from the Crown Lands Department to the Algonquins reads in part, or to the request of the Algonquins reads in part, the township of Lawrence is situated upon the confines of the Algonquin Park. The formation of a settlement of Indians upon the borders of a territory of this kind, it would be almost impossible to keep the Indians thus situated from hunting and trapping within the park. These people should be given to understand that they have no rights there, and they must not expect that these lands will be allowed to them. George W. Bartlett was superintendent of Algonquin Park from 1898 to 1922. During his tenure, he met a group of Algonquins camped just outside of the northwest boundary of the park. He later met the head of the family, who explained he had come into the park to gather roots and bark for medicines. Bartlett states, quote, "I hailed a passing canoe. Aha! We found it was the Indian from the camp we had visited earlier in the afternoon. The poor chap explained that he had been in the park getting roots and bark for medicine. This statement was corroborated by the contents of the canoe and by his appearance. We warned him and let him go, telling him we noticed the moose shanks in his camp." So the above passages show us that the Algonquins occupied the area of what is now Algonquin Park well and immediately before it was established. So the park was established in 1893, and no land was confirmed in the area now known as Algonquin Park for the Algonquins. You've just heard evidence of what the initial impact of the establishment of the park was on them. But that did not stop us from entering and using the resources of Algonquin Park as we have always done. The Government of Ontario commissioned the research firm Joan Holmes and Associates to research the Algonquin claim. The report was completed in 1993, and Volume 2 contains a large amount of documentation of Algonquins in and around Algonquin Park for purposes of hunting, fishing, and trapping after the park was created, and many references to members of Golden Lake, now Pikwakanagan. So we see here of Algonquins being charged and their guns, traps, and canoes and equipment confiscated by game wardens. Many ended up being convicted and fined. Still, many continue to take their chances because it was their only source of livelihood, as most could not find or refused other employment. Pikwakanagan members were not only fined and had their equipment confiscated. In many instances, or some instances, some were jailed. An RCMP crime report dated April 14, 1925 stated that a Golden Lake band member had recently been released from Burwash, where he had served a sentence of 3 months for trapping inside the Algonquin Park boundary. 3 months in jail for doing what Algonquins had done for thousands of years, long before any Europeans came here. Still, many continue to sneak into the park because, well, they had to take their chances. And some of these documents show that the Algonquins considered that area of the park to be their hunting grounds. In 1947, Golden Lake Chief James Zavali wrote that some 30 years ago, when enlarging Algonquin Park, the government took a substantial area of our trapping grounds and added that to the eastern part of the park. After much correspondence and lobbying, and with the support of some other government officials, the Algonquins of Golden Lake were provided with a number of trapping zones in the 1950s in the eastern portion of the park. And I think part of the reason for this was also because flooding was occurring, and flooding and washing out the railroad line that runs through the park. Beginning in the 1980s, things began to change dramatically or change significantly. And with a significant amount of historical evidence and with legal backing, the Algonquins of Golden Lake, now Pikwakanagan, decided to force the issue of their Aboriginal rights to harvest in Algonquin territory, including Algonquin Park. At that time, Chief Cliff Maness, and a number of other members received 48 charges for hunting offenses in Algonquin Park. Since then, things are beginning to change. This eventually led to our land claim negotiations, which are continuing today with Canada, Ontario. We now hope for greater change, greater recognition, and involvement of Algonquins in the Algonquin Park. So at this point, I think there is an opportunity then to change some of the past, and with the cooperation of people such as yourselves, with the government, we think that we can play a very important role in the future of the park. I know a lot of people have a good place in their heart for Algonquin Park, and the fact is that we do too. And we think it is a place that should be managed well, protected, and for everybody's use and benefit. And we would like to contribute to that, and we think that with your cooperation that we'll be able to do that and be partners in managing and looking after this wonderful and beautiful resource. So with that, that's the Algonquins experience.